Hello everybody, it is Coach Malcolm here, and this is my second video in my series on the Giuoco Piano opening for white. So if you haven't seen the first video, it's actually pretty important to understand more of the ideas in this one. I'm not going to be going over some of the same ideas twice. Maybe I'll touch on them lightly, but if you are really interested in playing this opening, if you see this video, it looks interesting, check out that first video so you can really grasp it. So like we talked about last time, the Giuoco starts out e4, e5, king's pawn opening, knight f3, knight c6, all very normal. But instead of our bishop b5, Ruy Lopez, that some of you guys may be more familiar with, bishop c4 is going to be played here. And bishop c4, the way that we respond is if bishop c5, we play c3, right, both challenging the d4 square. And if knight f6, challenging e4, we're just going to defend that e4 square. Again, if that kind of seems confusing, go to my last video. I explain it in a lot more detail. So here we're going to look at some sort of divergences, some different variations that our opponents can play as black. So knight f6, like I said, attacking e4, we're going to play pawn d3, just guarding that e4 pawn. Solid move as well, allows our bishop to get out. The whole works. So there are some places, right? Originally we looked at bishop c5 here, which we'll come into in a second. But here d5 is an option for black to play. But d5 is actually not a really great move. If d5, what we are going to do is play pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, and we'll notice this semi-open file. So we're going to castle, and we are ahead in kingside development. They still have their bishop in the way, and our rook is heading over to e1, targeting e5, targeting any potential threats, pins, having to do with that king. Black can play something like bishop d6, trying to prophylactically guard this e5 pawn, because they are just going to hang this d5, and they, unfortunately for them, have no, bishop takes h2, queen takes d5 tactics like that. So they can't play bishop d6. Most likely they'll play something like bishop e7, but here rook e1 is pretty annoying. We've got two attackers on this e5 pawn. No great way for them to defend it at all, right? So I think f6 may even be the best move here. And after f6, we can just play d4, right? Targeting this center. They've already opened up this diagonal. This is going to be problems for them, and this is just difficult for them to deal with. If they play bishop f6, we can just target this square even more. I think here I would still suggest d4. We're just adding another attacker to that pinned e5 pawn if they decide to castle or something. I don't see any problem with going down this road. Now we're attacking this piece, and we're attacking this weak knight on d5. So if they decide to take back, free piece right there. All right, so anyways, pawn d5. Usually pawn d5 before black castles in this opening is a mistake on their part. So d5 here, we're going to take with our pawn. All right, so let's go back to our main line. Bishop c5, attacking this d4 center square, c3. That's how we remember it. Let us, have influence attack that d4 square as well. Now here the question is, what happens if d5? See if you can find the pretty nasty way that white gets an advantage here. The combination, how do we deal with d5, and how are we going to develop another piece to make a ton of different threats? Take a second or two, pause your videos if you need to. All right, so similarly to our first variation where they played d5 without this bishop on c5, we're going to take on d5. Obviously, the queen can't take back. We have our bishop there. Knight takes d5, and now we are going to play queen b3, all right? Attacking this knight on d5, that's our first threat, right? Two attackers, one defender. If black just simply castled, we get our free piece right here. If black decided to play knight f6, which may even be their best move because of how bad their situation is, we are going to play bishop takes f7. Not only are we gaining a pawn, now this king can't castle. He's going to have to move. This is just a very unfortunate position for black. Here, I don't think we would want to test our luck with something like knight g5. I would actually rather just move my bishop back. Move my bishop back to c4. If we get fort, I think we'll be all right, and then we can castle our king soon enough, and we've already messed up black's position enough. Other threats here, if something like bishop e6 to guard d5, we have queen takes b7, attacking this knight on c6. If this knight decides to move, queen b5, a pretty nasty fork right here. If this knight decides to move right away to guard d5, queen b5 again, another nasty fork. There's just really not a good situation for black. Like I said, I think the best move is knight f6, right, which isn't good for them. We're just going to take on f7. All right, so again, another example of black playing d5 before castling, and it doesn't work out too well for them. But let us take a look at d6. So if you remember from our first video, I looked at castles, right? Castles, d6, they can kind of be played interchangeably. Either way, we play this bishop b3. That's what we did in our last line. That's what we're going to do here. If our opponent plays bishop g4, this looks like it is going to convert into what we had last time. This is the same exact position. But if our opponent plays bishop e6 here, it's a bit of a different story. So you have options here, right? One option is to take on e6, mess up their pawn structure a little. I've seen people do this queen b3. I don't particularly like this as much. They can play queen d7 and then rook b8 is coming over. You're not doing too great as white. Black has, we can look at that for a second. I believe that's best play, but I'm not positive. Queen d7 is going to guard e6, and if you take this pawn, this just doesn't look good for me. For white's perspective, you got your queen all the way on a6 and your knight developed. Black is ready to castle. They've already got an open file they might be able to work with. 3 minor pieces developed. It's just not worth that pawn to me. So what I like to play instead is bishop c2. Like I said, we save this bishop, and now we have other ideas planned. So let's say black continues. They castle, right? We are going to castle as well. First, we want to get our king to safety. And now let's say they play queen e7, right? They develop like a normal game. See if you can find our combination here to win some material, get a much better position as white. All right, hopefully we found this move d4, okay? At d4, obviously we're attacking the bishop. If this bishop just decides to move away right away, we have a nice pawn fork, okay? Forking that knight and that bishop. We're supported by e4. We're winning material here. If black first decides to take on d4 and then move their bishop, same exact thing. We have our pawn fork yet again. And if, this is the problem, right? I mean, we're probably noticing by this point. This piece is being attacked, and if this piece moves, then d5 is a threat. And the reason that we castled first, if you haven't noticed, is because we would have run into this annoying bishop b4 check, and then they're able to save one of their pieces afterwards because they have this tempo. So, like we saw, we're going to castle first. Now bishop b4 is just a nothing move. There's nothing to check on e1, so d5 yet again on our pawn fork. The best play for black here is this bishop c4 move, okay, attacking this rook on f1, but we're still going to win material here. We'll keep track of the material. Pawn takes c5, bishop takes f1. We're going to take on d6, pawn takes or queen takes. Queen takes f1. If we count up our material here, the pawns are equal, but we have 2 pieces for a rook. In the middle game, we're going to play something like knight c3, bishop e3, bishop f4 if that queen moves, bring our rook over to d1, 2 pieces for a rook. In my opinion, and in the opinion of many, many chess players that I know, 2 pieces for a rook is a much better trade. And it's more points. 3 and 3 is 6, and then we just have our rook for 5. So just on the very raw point scale, it is more points. So this is a trick that you can play here. This bishop c2 castles. Your opponent may notice it. Play something like bishop b6 here. And in this case, I would just continue with our regular plan of maneuvering this knight to, you can still maneuver the knight to g3 even though this bishop is on e6 and come to f5, or you can play something like rook e1, guard this e4 pawn, and look into these sort of d4 pushes to have more play in the center of the board, right? Because we don't have our bishop on g4 in this case, so this sort of knight g3, knight h4 combo that we did in our last video isn't as effective. But it's still something you can try out. Bring your knight to f5, queen to f3, and try and attack the king side. Sometimes these openings are good to experiment with. They're good to try different sort of techniques, different lines out, see what works for you, and games on ChessKid that aren't for actual rating points, not your serious matches, but the games that you can play on the side are really good for that. But let's get back into it. So let's say black goes with their main line here that we were looking at in the last video, castles. We are going to play our bishop b3, but now here black has castled, and one idea they can do now d5. You'll remember You'll remember earlier in this video I said d5 before black castles is usually a mistake. We had our pawn takes, and then queen b3. We had our pawn takes and castles and bring our rook to e1. In this case, it's not as bad. And what we're going to do here is just a very simple queen e2. Okay, we don't want to lose this central control. If they take, we're just going to take back. Don't worry about this open file. We're going to be castling. Let's say we kick the bishop. We're going to be castling very soon. There's nothing to worry about. The point is we don't want to, obviously our e4 pawn is being attacked twice. We only have one defender. Queen e2 offers that second defense, but we don't want to get rid of this pawn structure. This pawn structure with our pawn on c3, pawn on e4. It's all right if these d pawns go missing. It can even be useful. once we bring this, if we want to ever bring this rook over to d1 and have an attack like this, but that is what we're going to do. So just to reiterate the ideas gone over in this video, okay? If d5 is played too early here, we have our idea of bringing the rook over to e1 and targeting e5. I'm sorry, there's a little background noise right now. I hope it stops. I'm going to pause the video, come right back. Alright, that should be better. The other variation that we looked at was bishop c5, c3, and then d5. This is even worse after we have our queen b3 combo. Attacking b7 if that bishop moves, attacking f7, attacking d5. We have this fork here. If we want just so many ideas, that works for us. The other thing we looked at was, right here, bishop c5, c3, d6. We are going to go back to c2. That's what I like better. Castles, and if our opponent forgets this mistake, we have our d4 and then d5 push that we can use. And then finally, this isn't really a tactical variation, but it is important to know if our opponents play castles, they don't play that d6 move. Bishop b3, now they play d5, we're going to play queen e2, just guarding our e4 pawn, making sure our queens don't get traded off for whatever reason. We want this queen, remember, to come to f3 and g3 sometimes to help with the attack. So we're just going to play queen e2, castle away, and then have our knight maneuver, knight d2, knight f1, knight g3, and then continue like we did in our previous video. So I understand this might be very confusing. If you haven't seen the previous video, like I said, go check that out if some of these ideas, particularly this knight maneuver that I keep referring to, is not really clicking with you. That's because I really go deeper into it in my previous video. So, like I said, check that out. I hope this video helped. And again, the best way to practice these openings, guys, not to play them like a robot. It's to test them out, test out these different variations. Always come back to these videos if you need to. And, try them on your games. That's the best way to learn openings, is just practice, 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 practice. But that is the end of this video. I will probably be back with another Giuoco video because there are more lines to cover, and I will see you then.